customer success at a startup looks like, I would say three main things. So one day you might be doing more customer experience work, like high level strategy, or working with product really closely to say to make a bucket and say blue because no one's finding it. And I will note that this is incredibly fast paced. So you might actually get a project from idea to deployment in less than a day.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Edith for CSM Practice, the customer success consulting firm. Today, we have Jennifer Chiang, who is the Director of Customer Success for Yup Technologies. Yup Technologies is a young startup, and so Jennifer is the Head of Customer Success working with another CSM at the company, and she started the customer success function. But she didn't stop there, of course. She took all of her experiences and she wrote a fabulous book, and the book's name is The Startup Guide to Customer Success. And I'm really thrilled to have her and share all her insights with us and her experience going through, the evolution of customer success at her organization. So Jennifer, welcome to the channel.
Thanks for having me.
By the way, guys, if you go to our CSM Practice website under blogs, we have 10 books that are recommended for customer success managers and professionals, and Jennifer's book is in our top 10. So you're welcome to go out there and download the entire list if you're looking for something to read. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone, subscribe to our YouTube channel for all the great videos that we produce on customer success. So Jennifer, what does customer success look like for a young startup? And how does your day look like as a customer success manager of a team, as well as, I'm sure you have your own quota, so your own book of business. Tell me a little bit, how does it look like at a startup?
Yeah, because our teams are just so small, our day-to-days are a lot more varied. So you'll be wearing many, many different hats. And I'm sure if I were to open my schedule right now, this week looks completely different from last week and the week before. Customer success at a startup looks like, I would say three main things. So one day you might be doing more customer experience work, like high-level strategy, or working with product really closely to make a bucket and say blue because no one's finding it. And I will note that this is incredibly fast paced. So you might actually get a project from idea to deployment in less than a day. And then, on other days, you might be doing the more traditional customer success work, working directly with clients, building that trusted advisor relationship, understanding the pain points and challenges of folks and how we can help them reach that next level, reach their goals. Last thing that I deal with more than other CSMs who aren't at startups is, crunching the data. We don't have the luxury of having a data analyst or a huge data team to help us. So oftentimes we have to go out, get that data ourselves, build out the dashboard ourselves, dive into it, which I think is a lot of fun, but some people may be a little daunted by it. I've heard that comparatively, we deal with a lot more firefighting than other CSMs because of the smaller team size and just the younger CS team maturity. But I just think that's part of the role, and it's quite fun.
You didn't start from customer success, right? But now you're the head of customer success of a small team, but still, when you just joined your company, you weren't in customer success, right?
Yeah, I was actually, as you joined the startup, we were 10 people and one dog, and half the team other than engineers were generalists. So I was a generalist. I was technically on the business development team. We did things ranging from marketing to sales to a lot of strategic work.
And so how did you end up being in customer success? Did you have to pitch the function to the CEO? I know many CEOs in young startups don't necessarily understand the need for customer success. And so it's even a struggle to just start it up. Did you experience the same thing? Can you tell me a little bit about that process?
I would say that there's three main prongs that I used. The first thing, and we brought it up a little bit earlier, is we have to align on values with the CEO or the executive team. And so, for example, how are they thinking about the customer? How are they thinking about lifetime value, if at all? Is there an alignment on how folks think about the customers? Because if there isn't, not only will it be harder to pitch, but it's going to be much harder to operate once it is official, right? You want someone who understands what's going on. Once we got that aligned, I think the second and third prongs were around data. So one prong around qualitative data and another one around quantitative data. So the qualitative data showed impact. Having those customer stories that showed how having someone there to guide customers and used the product successfully was helpful, and how a dedicated resource paid off in referrals and testimonials. And though we didn't have that many at the beginning, it was good to see that trends were looking pretty good. And last but not least is the quantitative data, which showed both impact and potential, and very importantly, potential. And this is all through the numbers. And in my case, I first showed how currently, with no one really thinking about the customer's success and onboarding them properly, that had led to poor retention rates, which is not a good business model. And then so when I showed them, if we were just to improve retention rates by 1%, by 5%, and how easy that would be, just like having someone think about the customer experience, having someone create a very simple success plan for folks, how that would affect the business, how much more revenue that would bring in just 1 year, in 2 years, and 5 years down the line. And then you just say, like, what if there's a whole person dedicated to this? Maybe you'll see an increase in 10%, 20, maybe even more. When you build out that case, it's really hard to refute. So, and that's how I did it. 3 prongs: align on values, share impactful stories, and then show the potential through data.
And so you got yourself into a full-time position doing just customer success. How long did it take you to get a budget for another CSM?
Oh, yeah. I mean, at a startup, because you got to hustle, you got to have grit, you have to first prove out the concept yourself before you have the budget to hire people. And I've seen this, it's not just a customer success thing. It's, if you're building out a marketing team, a sales team, you always have to prove it out yourself. People always love when CEOs or just the first people building the vertical understand what's going on and are not just delegating everything. So at my startup, I was a one-woman show for about a year, doing everything from going to clients in person, to onboard folks, to crunching the numbers, to building out MVPs or minimal viable products, things that I knew customers would want, but yet I don't have the case to ask engineering to do it yet, or didn't have the budget to ask engineering to do it yet. So I try to build everything myself. And then once I had a better understanding of what worked and what didn't work, that's when I started out building out my processes and building a very, very simple playbooks. And this helped me to understand, one, what could I automate? And then what could I outsource? And what exactly I needed a team member to do. Because I don't want someone to come in and do things that I could easily automate. That is not a good business case. And then so once I was able to think all that through and pitch it to the CEO, it was much easier to say, these are the potential impacts a new CS team member would have. And that's kind of how I got it.
So you got the budget and you were on your way to hire people. How did you interview a CSM for a very young startup? Obviously, the customer success is just morphing. What were you looking for in terms of skills and the type of person that would thrive under this kind of environment?
When you're interviewing candidates for, startup CSMs, I like to ask them questions about how they would fit in a startup, because that fit is super important. How do they approach ambiguity, and can they execute on strategic objectives? And they have to be okay with ambiguity, because startups have a lot of high highs and a lot of equally low lows, and folks need to be able to handle that. I've brought on people early on that they said, hey, I know how to handle this situation. I love wearing many hats. I love, the hustle and bustle, only to find them a few months in barely holding on and seeing how anxious they are. So I would always say, if you want to, look to either interview, I would look for that grit, that hustle. And I think a really good self-test to see if you have that quality is if I were to say to you, I want you to go out, figure out who the customer is. And you may ask, well, what's our starting point? What do we know so far? What materials do we have so far? And I tell you, we know absolutely nothing. And that sinking feeling that you may have just got? One, that happens a lot. And if that scares you, then perhaps a startup isn't for you, and maybe you want to look for a medium size or a little bit of a larger startup, or even a bigger company. But if that feeling motivates you and makes you think, wow, I can start from zero, I can figure this all out by myself, and that's when you can start thinking, hey, maybe there's something here to be a startup CSM. I think that's one big thing. How do you handle it? How do you handle ambiguity? Are you able to have that grit, that hustle, and really have it, not just say you do? And I think the second big thing I look for when hiring a candidate is culture fit. And yes, culture fit is a word that's thrown out there a lot, but I think it's important for both you, the applicant, and the company to think about. So for startups, I'm often looking for resilience and resourcefulness.
When you interview those folks, can you give me an example of questions you would ask them to find that out, or even scenario or tests you would give out? Just make sure that you hire properly.
One of the assignments I give is actually I ask applicants to pitch our product to me. And as an education technology startup CSM, I'm often repitching our product to stakeholders that weren't on sales calls. So for example, if we're working with a district, maybe I'm working with the teachers and the teachers have never heard of, whatever we're working on, like they just got this new thing. So I ask applicants to prepare a pitch as an take-home assignment and then present the pitch at the next call that they have with me. And the reality is I am not looking for information accuracy. I'm actually looking for resilience and resourcefulness. Sometimes I hear when I get the assignment back, I hear, oh, well, you didn't give me that many materials to review, so I couldn't really prepare much. And that tells me, they may not be completely ready because if I were to hire them, I may need to hold their hand more. And then, however, sometimes I hear from applicants, well, even though you didn't give me that much material, I went to every blog post, I scoured their website, and I think I came up with something. And that tells me they have that resilience, that resourcefulness that is needed to work in an ed tech startup.
Just thinking about your type of startup, is this the type where it sounds like you guys handle a lot of accounts each, not like 7 or even 25. Would that be a correct statement? Like, what is the CSM ratio we're talking about here?
Yeah, so I think for context, my company recently pivoted strategies from business to consumer, so B2C, to business with B2B. So, focusing on selling directly to parents versus focusing on selling directly to schools. So the numbers shifted quite a bit. I will say in the past, each CSM handled, about a few hundred accounts, whereas now each CSM handles roughly 25 accounts. And I think this added focus is a unique startup advantage because it allows us to spend more time with each customer and really dive in and understand what is going on or what is or isn't working. Of course, we're only a year in, so into this new B2B strategy. So I hope to bring that ratio a little bit closer to 1 to 30 or 1 to 50, depending on school sizes, but we'll see how it goes.
So when we were at the higher range, how much of a role did data and analysis play? I think you said it was one of your third prongs. What kind of analysis have you done? What was really important for you at that time?
Yeah, data and information is just absolutely crucial. I mean, otherwise you'd be making the same mistakes over and over again, and that's not good. So when it comes to data, I think first I want to say I always see folks forgetting to understand what their objective is. And I think this is a common mistake that people make because more often than not, you can't just look at a raw set of data and just expect the conclusion to come out at you. By understanding what your objective is of looking at data, you can better work the data to find the trends that you need without getting too lost. And then as for the trends themselves, I actually recommend for startups, especially those that are very early on, to focus on what I call like step 1 metrics. Those metrics that are leading indicators to big metrics. So something that leads to churn, but not necessarily churn. Churn is still a good metric. You should still look at churn. But when you're so early on, I highly recommend just focusing on understanding those metrics that come before it. So a really great example is adoption metrics, because after all, if no one's adopting, I'm pretty sure no one's going to be retaining. Yeah, things like that. 2 more things I'll actually caution when it comes to data, and this is very unique to startups, is first, sometimes at startups, you actually don't have all the data that you're looking for. And so you might be working really closely with product to track the data and ensure that before features are released, you have a way of collecting the data because not everything's automatically tracked. So you got to do a little bit more searching. Another thing I'll also note is, especially if you're trying to revolutionize the game as a startup, there actually may not be that much benchmark data out there for you to compare to. So, and I know we're always looking like, if my churn is, X percent, is that good? Is that bad? But as a startup, it's really hard to tell especially if you're, doing something completely different. You have to be comfortable with that ambiguity. Don't be too discouraged if you run into that.
As a startup, you have so many customers that you need to deal with and so little resources. You don't have, the budget to buy necessarily like a customer success application right off the bat. What kind of tools and software did you use to scale up, even when it was just yourself? What kind of productivity tools or Anything that you found yourself using a lot to make a difference for you?
So at the end of the day, like, what do you really need as a CSM? You need some way to track who your customers are. You need some way to measure what they're doing. And I think you need some way of communicating with them. If you boil that down, that can be as simple as email and Google Sheets, which is what I did for at least a couple of years before I started building out and buying other things. So that's kind of what I did. You kind of focus on the basics, focus on what you exactly need, especially when you're super small and you don't have playbooks, you don't have a really good idea of what you're even doing. Keeping something very lean and flexible and something that you can change very quickly is the name of the game. So I would focus on that. If you are going to get something else, the next tool I would look at would be an email automation tool, because those things are lifesavers.
Use
And
MailChimp or something?
yeah, so I first started using yet another mail merge because that was free, and startups are all about that. And then after that, we started looking into the bigger companies such as like Sendinblue, Active Campaign, and things like that.
Where did you manage your client list? Was it Google Sheets or did you use something smarter?
Yeah, so what's so funny is that I started out with Google Sheets, and we had some new people come in. They're like, oh, well, we need to graduate from Google Sheets. And I'm like, okay, what do you recommend? And we went straight to Salesforce. And that was actually a really bad idea, because for a startup of our size, Salesforce did not allow us to have that flexibility to add things, change things, because we were still figuring out half our processes, right? Because a startup, nothing's completely set in stone just yet. So that was not a best move. Try to find something a little bit more flexible, a little bit smaller.
Back a medium, a happy medium, or did you go back to Google Sheets?
So actually, we now use Slack as our kind of our CRM, which is actually really fun.
What about user community and webinars? What do you use?
So when it comes to webinars, good old Zoom, good old fashioned, Google Meets, things like that, keeping it simple, trying new things in order to build that community.
What are your three most favorite Google extension as a customer success manager?
I'm a little old school, but I think my favorite one, I mean, I use yet another mail merge quite a lot. So I think that was really great. Sending later is also a godsend. I know that Google recently did not make an extension and built it in, but for a really long time while I was building out my team, that was still technically an extension. So I think
Yeah,
that's probably one of my favorite ones. And I think the last one for me is reminders.
that's awesome. Well, lots of great tips for someone who's either thinking about moving to work at a small, young startup as a CSM, both from tactical tips on, what Google extensions should you be thinking about, to tools in general, to how to think about what to concentrate on to make that customer success function successful and prove your value quickly. I want to thank you for your time, Jennifer. Guys, if you liked today's session, check out the comments below. We're going to add a link to how you can find Jennifer's book about customer success for startups, as well as links to the extensions she mentioned. So thank you so much for sharing those. Guys, I'll see you at the next video.